I stood alone at my husband's graveside watching the casket lower into the frozen February ground while snow fell on empty chairs. 24 hours ago, I thought grief was the worst pain imaginable. I was wrong. The real agony came from staring at those vacant seats where my parents, my sister Diana, and my best friend Sarah should have been sitting. Instead, they chose champagne toasts and engagement photos 2 states away. As dirt hit the mahogany wood, my phone buzzed with 22 missed calls from Mom. The message read, "We need to talk now." Everything I believed about family was about to shatter. 3 days after burying my husband Jake alone, I sat in our Denver kitchen surrounded by sympathy cards that felt like mockeries. Each beautiful floral arrangement reminded me of the empty funeral home where only 5 people had come to pay their respects to a man who deserved so much more. The irony wasn't lost on me that Diana's engagement invitations were mixed in with condolence notes from strangers who cared more about honoring Jake's memory than my own blood relatives. I kept replaying the phone conversation from 2 weeks earlier when Diana had called with her big news. Her voice had been sickeningly sweet when she announced that she and Bradley had chosen February 15th for their engagement party. The same date we had scheduled Jake's funeral after the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do. "Oh, Cora," she had said with fake concern, "I'm so sorry about the timing, but we've already sent out invitations and booked the venue. You understand, right? Jake would want us to celebrate love and new beginnings." I had begged her to change the date. Jake had been battling pancreatic cancer for 3 years, and we all knew the end was near. Surely one day could be moved for a funeral. But Diana had refused, claiming that changing plans would cost thousands of dollars they didn't have. The cruel twist was that I knew my family had money. Diana's lifestyle proved it with her designer clothes, expensive vacations, and the luxury apartment she somehow afforded on her retail manager salary. When I called my parents desperately seeking support, Dad's response had cut deeper than any surgeon's blade. "Diana's been planning this for months, Cora. Jake wouldn't want us to cancel a celebration of life because of death. You're being selfish." Selfish. That word echoed in my mind as I sorted through Jake's belongings looking for anything that might bring comfort. Instead, I found something that made my blood freeze. Hidden in his desk drawer was a manila folder labeled Family Financial Records in Jake's careful handwriting. My husband had been a paralegal before his illness, and his attention to detail was legendary. Inside were bank statements, property records, and handwritten notes that painted a disturbing picture. Jake had been investigating my family's finances. The documents showed transfers of large sums of money between accounts belonging to my parents, Diana, and various shell companies. There were records going back 5 years tracking money that should have been in a trust fund left by my grandfather, Edgar, who had died 2 years ago. According to these papers, that inheritance was supposed to be split between Diana and me, but I had never received a penny. The most damning evidence was a series of bank transfers showing that Diana's engagement ring, which she claimed cost $8,000, had actually cost $40,000. The money had come from an account labeled Edgar's Estate Distribution. My dead grandfather's money had paid for Diana's blood diamond, while Jake and I struggled to cover his cancer treatments with our modest savings and insurance. But the discovery that broke my heart completely was a folder of medical bills. Jake had researched experimental cancer treatments that our insurance wouldn't cover. The costs were astronomical, but there were notes in Jake's handwriting indicating he had expected financial help from my family. Attached to these bills were copies of conversations between Jake and my father, where Dad had promised that family takes care of family and that money wouldn't be an obstacle to Jake's recovery. That money had never come. Instead, it had been diverted to fund Diana's lavish lifestyle, while Jake suffered through painful treatments that might have been unnecessary if he could have accessed better care. My family had let my husband die while stealing the money that could have saved him. The final document in the folder was a handwritten letter from Jake to me, dated just 1 week before his death. In it, he apologized for investigating my family without telling me, but explained that something about their behavior during his illness had triggered his legal instincts. He suspected fraud but wanted proof before devastating me with accusations against people I loved. Cora. The letter read, "If something happens to me, please don't let them continue taking advantage of you. You deserve so much better than their manipulation and greed. The evidence is all here. Use it to protect yourself and honor your grandfather's memory. I love you more than life itself, and I want you to fight for the truth." As I finished reading Jake's words, my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope that my best friend since college was finally ready to explain her absence from the funeral. Instead, her voice was cold and businesslike. "Cora, I need you to stop calling me. Diana explained everything about Jake's funeral, and honestly, you're being dramatic. People die every day, but Diana only gets engaged once. You need to move on and stop making everything about yourself." The line went dead, and I stared at the phone in disbelief. Sarah, who had been my maid of honor and had promised to be there for me through anything, had chosen a party over my husband's funeral and was now treating me like a stranger. The betrayal felt almost worse than my family's abandonment because I had trusted Sarah with my deepest fears and hopes throughout Jake's illness. But Jake's investigation gave me something I hadn't had before: purpose. My husband had died believing in the truth, and he had armed me with the tools to seek justice. As I organized his evidence into neat piles, I realized that my grief was transforming into something more powerful. My family thought they had isolated me and broken my spirit by skipping Jake's funeral, but they had actually freed me from the obligation to protect them. For the first time since Jake's diagnosis, I felt financially secure. His life insurance policy would cover our debts and leave me with enough money to live independently. More importantly, I now had evidence of crimes that could send my family to prison. They had chosen Diana's fake celebration over honoring Jake's memory, and that choice was going to cost them everything they had stolen and more. I carefully locked Jake's evidence in our home safe and began planning my next move. My family expected me to grieve quietly and fade into the background while they continued their theft. Instead, I was going to use every legal skill Jake had taught me to ensure they faced consequences for their betrayal. The woman who had stood alone at that graveside was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love meant fighting for justice, not enabling crime. Jake's lawyer, Patricia Wells, had been his mentor and friend long before she became our family attorney. Her law firm occupied the entire 15th floor of a downtown Denver high-rise, and her reputation for taking down white-collar criminals was legendary. When I called requesting an emergency meeting, Patricia cleared her entire afternoon schedule without hesitation. Jake spoke about these suspicions before he died, Patricia revealed as we sat in her conference room overlooking the Rocky Mountains. He wanted to protect you from the truth until he had irrefutable proof, but he also wanted to ensure you had legal recourse if something happened to him. She handed me a sealed envelope that Jake had left in her care with strict instructions to open only after his death. Inside were flash drives containing financial records, recorded phone conversations, and video surveillance footage that painted an even more disturbing picture than what I had found at home. The scope of my family's theft was staggering. For 5 years, my parents had been systematically draining my grandfather Edgar's trust fund through a complex series of fraudulent transactions. They had created fake care facility bills, medical equipment purchases, and therapy costs that never existed. Diana had been listed as Edgar's primary caretaker, allowing her to access his accounts while he was supposedly suffering from advanced dementia. But the most shocking revelation was that Edgar's death certificate was a forgery. According to the medical examiner's office, no death certificate had ever been filed for Edgar Mitchell Harrison. My grandfather, who I had mourned and grieved for 2 years, was legally still alive despite having a funeral and burial that I had attended. Jake's investigation had uncovered that Edgar was being held in a private care facility in rural Montana, far from any family oversight. The facility operated without proper state licensing and specialized in keeping wealthy elderly patients sedated and isolated while family members drained their assets. Monthly payments of $15,000 were being made to this facility from Edgar's account supposedly for his care, but the money was actually going to maintain his imprisonment. The recorded conversations were the most damning evidence. Jake had secretly recorded phone calls where Diana admitted to stealing from Edgar's trust forge his death certificate and planning to eliminate any evidence of the fraud. In one particularly chilling recording, Diana told my mother that they needed to get rid of Edgar permanently once his accounts were fully drained. "We can't risk him recovering his memory," Diana's voice said clearly through the conference room speakers. "If anyone discovers he's alive, we'll all go to prison. The old man has served his purpose." Patricia showed me bank records proving that Diana's engagement ring wasn't just expensive. It was purchased with money specifically earmarked in Edgar's will for my education and Jake's medical care. My grandfather had left detailed instructions that if anyone in the family faced serious illness or educational expenses, his trust fund should provide immediate assistance. That money could have paid for Jake's experimental cancer treatments, but instead it had been stolen to buy Diana a piece of jewelry. The betrayal went deeper than simple theft. Medical records from Jake's oncologist showed that additional treatment options had been available if we could have afforded them. Advanced immunotherapy treatments costing $60,000 might have given Jake several more years of life, but without access to Edgar's money, we'd been forced to settle for basic chemotherapy that only prolonged his suffering. Jake spent his final months investigating this fraud instead of resting. Patricia explained, her voice thick with emotion. He was determined to ensure you would have financial security and legal recourse after his death. These documents represent hundreds of hours of work he completed while fighting cancer. The video surveillance footage was equally devastating. Jake had hired a private investigator to monitor my family's activities, and the resulting evidence showed Diana and my parents celebrating at expensive restaurants while claiming poverty whenever Jake's medical bills came up. There were videos of Diana shopping for designer clothes with Edgar's credit cards, my father purchasing a new luxury car with trust fund money, and my mother booking expensive spa retreats while telling me they couldn't afford to help with Jake's treatment costs. But the most heartbreaking footage showed Diana meeting with a man named Bradley Matthews, who wasn't just her fiancé, but a professional con artist specializing in inheritance fraud. Their conversations revealed that the engagement was a cover story for laundering stolen money and establishing new identities for fleeing the country once Edgar's accounts were completely emptied. Diana's engagement party wasn't just poorly timed, Patricia explained. It was carefully planned to coincide with Jake's funeral to ensure you were isolated and grieving while they finalized their escape plans. They needed you distracted and emotionally vulnerable while they transferred the remaining money offshore. The evidence showed that Sarah's betrayal wasn't random either. Bank records revealed that my former best friend had received $15,000 from Diana to keep Cora occupied and prevent her from asking questions about family finances. Sarah had been paid to be my confidant during Jake's illness, reporting back to Diana about my emotional state and financial concerns. Patricia handed me copies of text messages between Sarah and Diana discussing my pathetic devotion to Jake and planning ways to keep her from getting suspicious about the money. Sarah's friendship, which I had treasured for over a decade, had been purchased and scripted to serve Diana's criminal enterprise. The final revelation was that Edgar's will, filed with the probate court, left his entire estate to me, not Diana. The will specifically stated that if Edgar died while I was married, the money should go toward supporting my husband's medical care if needed. Diana had hidden this will and created a fraudulent version that split the money between us, but even that fake will had been ignored in favor of outright theft. Edgar loved you deeply, Patricia said, showing me handwritten letters from my grandfather, expressing pride in my marriage and concern for Jake's health. He wanted to ensure you were protected and provided for, especially if Jake's cancer progressed. Diana intercepted these letters and forged your responses, convincing Edgar that you didn't want his money and preferred that Diana handle everything. The scope of the betrayal was overwhelming, but Jake's meticulous documentation had created an airtight legal case. Patricia estimated that the total theft exceeded $2 million, when including investment growth and interest penalties. The evidence would be sufficient not only for criminal prosecution, but also for recovering the stolen money and securing additional damages for emotional suffering. As we concluded the meeting, Patricia handed me one final envelope that Jake had left with specific instructions. Inside was a key to a safety deposit box containing even more evidence, along with a letter explaining that he had contacted federal authorities about the interstate nature of the fraud. The FBI had been conducting their own investigation based on Jake's information, and agents were waiting for his death to conclude their case to avoid tipping off the criminals. Jake's final act was ensuring that your family's crimes would have federal consequences, Patricia said. They chose Diana's fake party over his funeral, not knowing that their absence was being documented as evidence of their callous disregard for family obligations while committing fraud. I left Patricia's office with more than legal ammunition. I had discovered that my husband had spent his final months fighting not just cancer, but also protecting me from financial ruin and emotional manipulation. His love had taken the form of careful investigation and strategic legal planning that would ensure justice was served even after his death. My family thought they had succeeded in isolating me and stealing Edgar's money. Instead, they had created a federal case that would destroy their freedom and reputation while giving me the resources to honor both Jake's memory and Edgar's wishes. The engagement party they had chosen over Jake's funeral was about to become the last celebration they would enjoy as free people. The private investigator Patricia recommended was Marcus Thompson, a former FBI agent whose specialty was financial fraud cases involving family crimes. Within 48 hours of our first meeting, Marcus had uncovered information that transformed my understanding of Diana's engagement from family betrayal to elaborate criminal conspiracy. Bradley Matthews wasn't just a con artist, he was a wanted fugitive with warrants in 3 states for inheritance fraud, identity theft, and elderly abuse. His real name was Bradley Marcus Collins, and his engagement to Diana was the culmination of an 18-month plan to liquidate Edgar's entire estate and disappear permanently. The engagement party wasn't a celebration, it was a money laundering operation, disguised as a family gathering. Marcus showed me surveillance footage from Diana's apartment building that revealed the true nature of her engagement preparations. Instead of wedding planning, Diana and Bradley were systematically packing valuable items and shipping them to offshore storage facilities. Bank records showed that during the week of Jake's funeral, Diana had liquidated over $400,000 in investments and transferred the money to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The engagement venue, which Diana claimed had cost $25,000 to book, was actually a community center rented for $300 under a false name. The catering, flowers, and entertainment that supposedly justified the enormous expense were completely fabricated. Instead, the money had been used to purchase false identification documents and establish new identities for Diana and Bradley's planned escape. "Your sister isn't just stealing money," Marcus explained during our second meeting. "She's erasing your entire family's legal existence to avoid prosecution. The engagement party was cover for finalizing new passport social security numbers and credit histories that would allow them to start over in a country without extradition treaties." The guest list for the engagement party revealed another layer of deception. Instead of family, friends, and relatives, most attendees were associates from Bradley's criminal network, including document forgers, money launderers, and other inheritance fraud specialists. My parents had unknowingly hosted a gathering of federal fugitives while celebrating their daughter's fake engagement to a wanted criminal. Marcus had infiltrated the party using a hidden camera and recorded conversations that would serve as key evidence in the federal case. The footage showed Diana openly discussing plans to disappear permanently once the stupid funeral drama dies down, and bragging about bleeding the old man dry while everyone thinks he's already dead. But the most disturbing revelation was that Edgar wasn't just alive, he was being systematically poisoned to maintain his compliant state. Medical records Marcus obtained from the illegal care facility showed that Edgar was being given experimental drugs to induce dementia-like symptoms while keeping him physically healthy enough to survive long-term imprisonment. The goal was to keep him alive but incapacitated until his accounts were completely drained. The facility, located in rural Montana, operated under the false name Sunset Manor, but was actually a privately owned warehouse converted to house elderly victims of inheritance fraud. Federal agents had been investigating the facility for months after discovering a network of similar operations across the western United States. Edgar was one of 12 elderly victims being held against their will, while family members stole their assets. Surveillance footage from inside the facility showed Edgar during lucid moments trying to communicate with staff and asking repeatedly about his granddaughter, Cora. He had retained enough mental capacity to understand his situation and had been trying to contact authorities for months, but his communications were being intercepted by Diana, who was listed as his emergency contact and legal guardian. The forged death certificate had been created by a corrupt funeral director who specialized in helping criminals fake the deaths of wealthy relatives. The funeral I had attended for Edgar had used a weighted casket filled with sand, while Edgar remained imprisoned 3 states away. The cemetery plot I visited to mourn my grandfather contained no human remains, just another layer of deception in Diana's elaborate fraud. Marcus revealed that Sarah's payment for betraying our friendship was larger than initially discovered. In addition to the $15,000 for monitoring me during Jake's illness, Sarah had received a $40,000 bonus for ensuring my isolation during the funeral. Her nursing career provided perfect cover for gathering information about Jake's medical condition and prognosis, which Diana needed to time the final phases of her theft. The text messages between Sarah and Diana were even more cruel than I had imagined. Sarah had reported intimate details about my grief, Jake's pain levels, and our financial struggles, allowing Diana to calculate exactly when Jake would die and how much money would be available for stealing. My best friend had monetized my husband's suffering for profit. But Marcus's most shocking discovery was that Diana hadn't just chosen the engagement party date to conflict with Jake's funeral, she had actively worked to accelerate Jake's death. Medical records showed that Diana had been visiting our home regularly during Jake's final months, claiming to help with his care. Security camera footage revealed that she had been tampering with his medication, replacing cancer treatment pills with placebos. "Your husband's decline wasn't entirely natural," Marcus explained, showing me pharmacy records that proved Diana had been picking up Jake's prescriptions and altering them. She was systematically sabotaging his treatment to ensure he died before he could complete his investigation or alert authorities to the theft. The realization that Diana had murdered Jake while stealing Edgar's money was devastating, but it also provided the final piece of evidence needed for a federal case involving multiple felonies. Marcus had coordinated with FBI agents who were preparing to arrest Diana Bradley and my parents simultaneously to prevent any escape or evidence destruction. However, Diana's criminal network was more sophisticated than initially suspected. Marcus discovered that Bradley had multiple escape routes planned, including private aircraft, false documentation, and safe houses in countries without extradition agreements with the United States. The engagement party had served as a final opportunity to coordinate these escape plans with associates. The investigation revealed that Diana had been researching untraceable methods of causing cancer treatment failure for months before implementing her plan. She had consulted with corrupt medical professionals, purchased identical medication containers, and practiced switching pills to ensure Jake's death appeared natural. Her goal was to inherit any life insurance money while eliminating the person most likely to discover her financial crimes. Bank records showed that Diana had already begun transferring money to offshore accounts the day after Jake's funeral, taking advantage of my grief and isolation to finalize her theft. She expected me to remain devastated and passive, while she disappeared permanently with Edgar's money and Jake's life insurance. The federal case was ready to proceed, but Marcus warned that Diana and Bradley were scheduled to leave the country within 72 hours. The engagement party had been their farewell celebration before fleeing to Switzerland, where they had established new identities and purchased a home with Edgar's stolen money. Everything Diana had done, from skipping Jake's funeral to planning her fake engagement, had been calculated to serve her criminal goals. She had sacrificed every family relationship and moral principle for money, and she had murdered my husband to cover her tracks. But Jake's investigation and Marcus's follow-up work had created an airtight case that would ensure justice was served before Diana could escape the consequences of her crimes. The woman who had chosen a party over her brother-in-law's funeral was about to discover that celebrations end, but federal prison sentences last for decades. Her betrayal had been complete, but so was the evidence that would destroy her freedom forever. Marcus Thompson's investigation took an unexpected turn when we attempted to visit Edgar's supposed gravesite to gather evidence of the fraudulent burial. The cemetery records showed inconsistencies that led us to question whether Edgar had ever actually been buried there. When we requested an exhumation order, the cemetery administrator revealed that the grave had been purchased under a false name and the burial documentation was incomplete. This discovery prompted Marcus to contact the FBI agents who'd been building their case based on Jake's initial evidence. Agent Rebecca Chen explained that their investigation had expanded beyond simple inheritance fraud when they discovered the illegal care facility network in Montana. Multiple families across several states had reported missing elderly relatives who had supposedly died, but whose death certificates couldn't be verified. "We've been tracking this operation for 18 months, Agent Chen explained during our meeting at the FBI field office in Denver. Your husband's evidence was the breakthrough we needed to connect the financial fraud to the physical imprisonment of victims. We estimate that over 50 elderly people are being held in facilities like the one where we believe your grandfather is located." The FBI had been conducting surveillance of the Montana facility for weeks, waiting for the right moment to execute raids simultaneously across multiple states. The evidence we provided about Diana's plans to flee the country had accelerated their timeline. Federal agents were prepared to move within 24 hours to prevent the destruction of evidence and the murder of witnesses. Agent Chen showed us aerial surveillance footage of the facility where Edgar was being held. From the outside, it appeared to be a legitimate care center with manicured grounds and medical equipment deliveries. However, thermal imaging revealed that most of the building was actually storage space for stolen assets, with only a small section housing the imprisoned victims. The facility operated under multiple false licenses and had been moving elderly victims between locations to prevent discovery by authorities or concerned family members. Edgar had been transferred twice in the past year, which explained why Diana's payments to the facility had been made to different bank accounts with varying business names. But when we arrived at the facility with federal agents and local law enforcement, we discovered something that changed everything. Edgar wasn't just alive and imprisoned, he was lucid and had been secretly documenting his captivity. Hidden beneath his mattress were dozens of handwritten notes detailing his abduction, the daily routines of his captors, and most importantly, recorded evidence of Diana's visits where she had confessed to murdering Jake. "I knew they thought the drugs were keeping me confused," Edgar explained to me during our emotional reunion in the facility's medical wing. "But I've been pretending to be more affected than I actually am, waiting for someone to find me. I heard about Jake's death from Diana herself. She bragged about switching his medication and watching him suffer." Edgar's mental clarity was remarkable considering the psychological torture he had endured for 2 years. He had been told repeatedly that his family had abandoned him, that no one was looking for him, and that he would die in the facility. Despite this emotional abuse, he had maintained hope and had been collecting evidence against his captors and Diana. The medical records from the facility revealed the full extent of the abuse Edgar had suffered. In addition to the drugs used to simulate dementia, he had been malnourished, physically restrained, and denied basic medical care to maintain his weakened state. His captors had been paid extra to ensure he remained alive but incapacitated until Diana's theft was complete. Edgar had recorded audio evidence using a small device he had hidden in his clothing during Diana's visits. The recordings captured Diana admitting to Jake's murder, detailing plans to kill Edgar once his accounts were emptied, and discussing her escape plans with Bradley. This evidence would be crucial for securing murder charges against Diana in addition to the fraud and kidnapping charges. But Edgar's liberation from the facility triggered a medical emergency. The combination of malnutrition, psychological trauma, and withdrawal from the drugs used to control him resulted in cardiac complications that required immediate hospitalization. As paramedics worked to stabilize him, Edgar grabbed my hand and whispered urgent information about additional evidence hidden in his former home. "Diana doesn't know about the safe in my basement," he said weakly. "The combination is your birthday. Inside are the original documents that prove everything she's stolen, plus videos of her admitting to fraud. She made me record a will giving her everything, but the real will is in that safe." Edgar's condition deteriorated rapidly as we traveled to the hospital in Denver. The years of abuse had taken a severe toll on his physical health, and doctors warned that his recovery would be lengthy and uncertain. However, his mental faculties remained sharp, and he was able to provide detailed statements to federal agents about the extent of Diana's criminal network. The safe in Edgar's basement contained evidence that exceeded even Marcus's expectations. In addition to financial documents proving the theft Edgar had secretly recorded, hundreds of hours of conversations with Diana over the past 5 years. The recordings showed the gradual development of Diana's criminal plans, from initial small thefts to elaborate fraud and eventually murder. One particularly damning recording captured Diana discussing her plans to eliminate both Jake and Edgar to cover her tracks. Once Jake's investigation is stopped permanently and Edgar finally dies, there won't be anyone left who knows about the missing money, Diana's voice said clearly. Cora will be too devastated to ask questions, and Sarah will keep her distracted until we disappear. The evidence also revealed that my parents' involvement in the fraud was more extensive than originally suspected. They had been active participants in Edgar's kidnapping, helping to transport him to the illegal facility, and maintaining the fiction of his death to neighbors and friends. Their claim of ignorance about Diana's crimes was completely false. Edgar's videos showed my father helping to forge medical documents and my mother coaching Diana on how to manipulate me during Jake's illness. They had been planning their escape along with Diana and Bradley, intending to leave me alone and penniless while they started new lives with stolen money. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a series of letters Edgar had written to me over the 2 years of his imprisonment. In them, he expressed his love for Jake, his pride in our marriage, and his desperate hope that someone would eventually discover the truth about Diana's crimes. He had never stopped believing that justice would prevail and that our family's love would overcome Diana's greed. "I never doubted that you would find me," Edgar said from his hospital bed as federal agents prepared to arrest Diana and her accomplices. "Jake was like a son to me, and I knew he would never let them get away with hurting you. Even in death, his love protected you and led you to the truth." Edgar's rescue and the evidence he provided gave federal agents everything they needed to pursue murder charges against Diana, in addition to the fraud and kidnapping charges. The network of illegal care facilities was exposed, leading to the liberation of dozens of other elderly victims and the arrest of numerous criminals involved in inheritance fraud operations across the United States. However, Marcus warned that Diana and Bradley had been monitoring law enforcement communications and might have discovered that Edgar had been found. Their escape plans were already in motion, and they had the resources and connections to disappear permanently if they weren't arrested immediately. The race to prevent Diana's escape while ensuring Edgar's survival created a complex situation requiring careful coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. Every hour that passed increased the risk that Diana would flee the country and escape prosecution for Jake's murder and Edgar's imprisonment. As federal agents prepared for simultaneous raids across multiple states, I sat by Edgar's bedside, holding the hand of the grandfather I had mourned for 2 years. His survival and the evidence he provided would ensure that Diana faced justice for her crimes, but the physical and emotional toll of his imprisonment would require months of recovery and healing. The network of criminals who had profited from elderly abuse and inheritance fraud was about to be dismantled, but Edgar's rescue was just the beginning of a complex legal process that would determine whether Diana and her accomplices would spend the rest of their lives in prison for their crimes against family love and human dignity. Diana's arrest was scheduled for dawn on March 3rd, but she discovered the federal investigation 12 hours before agents could execute their warrants. A corrupt employee at the Montana Care Facility had warned her that Edgar had been rescued and was providing evidence to authorities. Instead of fleeing immediately, Diana made a decision that revealed the true depth of her desperation and evil. She returned to Denver with a team of associates Bradley had recruited from his criminal network, intending to eliminate me before I could testify against her. Diana's plan was to have me declared mentally incompetent due to grief committed to a psychiatric facility, and then permanently silenced before her trial could begin. She had forged psychiatric evaluations claiming that I had been suffering from paranoid delusions about my family since Jake's death. The first indication that Diana was targeting me came when 2 men in medical uniforms appeared at my front door, claiming to be from the county mental health crisis team, responding to reports that I was threatening suicide. They had official-looking badges, authentic-appearing commitment papers, and a court order demanding my immediate evaluation at a private psychiatric facility. But Jake's training in legal procedures had taught me to verify official documents before complying with any demands. When I insisted on calling my lawyer before going with them, one of the fake doctors tried to inject me with a sedative, while the other attempted to physically restrain me. Only Patricia's unexpected phone call warning me about Diana's escape interrupted their attack. "Diana's been spotted in Denver with armed associates," Patricia's urgent voice said through my phone. "Federal agents are searching for her, but she's evaded capture. You need to get to a safe location immediately." I managed to escape through my back door while the fake doctors searched my house, presumably looking for Edgar's evidence that I had hidden there after his rescue. Marcus had anticipated that Diana might attempt to destroy evidence or silence witnesses, so we had moved all documentation to secure locations before Edgar's testimony became public knowledge. The chase through downtown Denver felt surreal, like something from an action movie rather than the aftermath of a family betrayal. Diana's associates pursued me in unmarked vehicles while I desperately tried to reach Patricia's law firm, where federal agents had established a temporary command center for the ongoing investigation. Diana had recruited professional criminals who specialized in eliminating witnesses in inheritance fraud cases. These weren't desperate amateurs, but experienced killers who understood how to make deaths appear accidental or suicidal. My murder would have been staged to look like a grief-stricken widow's tragic end, removing the primary witness against Diana's criminal enterprise. I finally reached the safety of Patricia's building, where FBI agents immediately placed me under protective custody. Agent Chen explained that Diana's decision to return to Denver instead of fleeing internationally indicated she was more desperate and dangerous than they had initially assessed. "She's burned all her escape routes by coming back," Agent Chen said. "Now her only option for avoiding life in prison is to eliminate the witnesses against her. That makes her extremely dangerous, but it also means we can capture her if we use you as bait." The evidence against Diana was already overwhelming, but federal agents wanted to record her confessing to Jake's murder and Edgar's imprisonment. They proposed using me as bait to draw Diana into a situation where she would reveal incriminating information while being monitored by law enforcement surveillance. Diana had been planning my psychiatric commitment for months, working with corrupt medical professionals who specialized in fraudulently declaring inheritance fraud victims mentally incompetent. The psychiatric facility where she intended to have me committed was actually a front for eliminating witnesses with a history of patients dying from accidental medication overdoses or suicide attempts. The fake psychiatric evaluation documents Diana had prepared claimed that I had been exhibiting violent behavior paranoid delusions about family members and suicidal ideation since Jake's death. Paid witnesses, including Sarah, were prepared to testify that I had been unstable throughout Jake's illness and had made threats against family members who disagreed with my accusations. But Diana's plan contained a fatal flaw. The psychiatric facility she had chosen was already under federal investigation for suspicious patient deaths, and several staff members were cooperating with authorities in exchange for immunity. Federal agents had been monitoring the facility for weeks, documenting evidence of witness elimination disguised as medical treatment. When Diana attempted to have me committed using forged court orders, she exposed her entire criminal network to federal surveillance. The fake doctors who had attacked me in my home were arrested, providing evidence about Diana's witness elimination plans. The corrupt psychiatrists who had prepared fraudulent evaluations were also arrested, revealing the scope of Diana's conspiracy to avoid prosecution. Meanwhile, Edgar's condition had stabilized in the hospital, and he was providing additional evidence to federal agents about Diana's criminal associates. His 2 years of imprisonment had given him detailed knowledge about the inheritance fraud network, including the identities of other victims, corrupt officials, and criminal facilitators who had enabled Diana's crimes. Diana's return to Denver had been motivated by her discovery that Edgar had recorded evidence of her confessing to Jake's murder. Without eliminating that evidence and the witnesses who could authenticate it, she faced certain conviction for first-degree murder in addition to numerous federal charges. Her desperation had overcome her survival instincts, leading her to take enormous risks to silence potential witnesses. The criminal network Diana had assembled included document forgers, corrupt medical professionals, and killers who specialized in inheritance fraud cases. Federal agents estimated that this network had been responsible for dozens of elderly murders and disappearances across multiple states, with total thefts exceeding $50 million over the past decade. Sarah's role in Diana's witness elimination plan was more extensive than her previous betrayal. She had been providing Diana with detailed information about my daily routines, mental state, and support systems to help plan my abduction and murder. Her nursing credentials gave her access to medical facilities and drug supplies that would be needed to stage my death as a suicide or accidental overdose. But the most disturbing revelation was that Diana had been planning to eliminate Edgar permanently once his accounts were completely drained. The illegal care facility had been instructed to increase his drug dosages gradually until he suffered fatal complications that would appear to be natural consequences of dementia and old age. His rescue had prevented his murder by only a few days. Diana's criminal enterprise had been operating for over a decade, targeting elderly victims with significant assets and family members willing to participate in inheritance theft. The engagement party that had conflicted with Jake's funeral was actually a celebration of the network's most successful operation, with Diana and Bradley planning to retire from criminal activity after stealing Edgar's money. Federal agents had identified at least 30 other families where similar frauds had been committed, with elderly relatives disappearing after being declared mentally incompetent by corrupt medical professionals. Diana's network had perfected a system for legal kidnapping and asset theft that had operated undetected for years. The evidence against Diana continued to mount as federal agents arrested her associates and recovered additional documentation. Each arrest led to more evidence and additional charges, creating a complex case that would likely result in multiple life sentences for Diana and her accomplices. However, Diana remained at large and extremely dangerous with access to resources and criminal contacts that could help her evade capture indefinitely. Federal agents warned that she would likely make additional attempts to eliminate witnesses before attempting to flee the country, making protective custody essential for anyone who could testify against her. The legal war Diana had started by murdering Jake and imprisoning Edgar was turning into a comprehensive federal investigation that would dismantle an entire network of inheritance fraud criminals. But her freedom to continue threatening witnesses meant that justice remained uncertain until she could be captured and brought to trial. My transformation from grieving widow to protected federal witness represented the final phase of Diana's betrayal, but also the beginning of the legal process that would ensure she faced consequences for choosing crime over family greed, over love, and murder over mercy. Diana's capture came through her own arrogance and miscalculation. Federal agents had been monitoring all communication channels associated with her criminal network, including encrypted messaging systems used by inheritance fraud specialists. When Diana attempted to coordinate one final witness elimination plan, she inadvertently revealed her location to authorities who had been tracking her for 72 hours. She had been hiding in an abandoned warehouse complex outside Denver, using underground tunnels to move between buildings while avoiding law enforcement surveillance. Her plan was to eliminate me, Edgar, and Patricia simultaneously before escaping through a complex network of safe houses and transportation routes that Bradley had established throughout the western United States. But Diana's desperation led her to trust associates who were already cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. When she arranged a meeting to coordinate attacks against the witnesses threatening her freedom, she walked directly into a federal trap that had been prepared specifically to capture her alive and gather additional evidence. The warehouse where Diana was hiding contained evidence that transformed the federal case from complex fraud to mass murder. FBI agents discovered detailed plans for eliminating over 20 witnesses across multiple states, along with weapons, forged documents, and communication equipment connecting Diana to unsolved murders of elderly victims and their family members. More importantly, agents found Diana's personal recordings, where she had documented her criminal activities for purposes of blackmailing associates who might consider betraying her network. These recordings included detailed confessions about Jake's murder, Edgar's imprisonment, and plans for eliminating additional family members who might interfere with her theft operations. The most damning evidence was a recording Diana had made just hours before her arrest, where she discussed plans for torturing me before staging my suicide to send a message to other potential witnesses. Her desire for revenge against my investigation had overcome her survival instincts, leading her to document evidence that would ensure her conviction for premeditated murder. Cora destroyed everything, Diana's voice said clearly in the recording. She was supposed to grieve quietly and disappear, but instead she found Jake's evidence and ruined our perfect operation. I want her to suffer for what she's done to our family. Diana's twisted perspective revealed that she genuinely believed her victims were responsible for the consequences of her crimes. She felt betrayed by Edgar's refusal to die quietly, by Jake's investigation of her theft, and by my pursuit of justice after his murder. In her mind, she was the victim of family members who had refused to enable her criminal behavior. The federal case against Diana and her network expanded dramatically when agents analyzed the evidence found in her warehouse hideout. Communications with associates revealed that similar inheritance fraud operations were active in over 20 states, with hundreds of elderly victims missing or dead under suspicious circumstances. Diana had been planning to use Edgar's stolen money to establish herself as a leader in organized inheritance fraud, franchising her methods to criminal networks across North America. The engagement party that had conflicted with Jake's funeral was actually a business meeting where Diana had been recruiting additional criminals to expand her operations. Bradley's role in the enterprise was more sophisticated than initially suspected. He wasn't just Diana's accomplice, but was actually the leader of a national network that specialized in inheritance fraud, identity theft, and witness elimination. Diana had been recruited by Bradley after he identified Edgar as a valuable target with significant assets and family members willing to participate in fraud. The investigation revealed that my parents' involvement wasn't limited to enabling Diana's theft, but included active participation in multiple murders. They had helped eliminate other elderly victims who had threatened to expose the fraud network, including Edgar's former neighbors who had asked questions about his disappearance. Sarah's betrayal extended beyond spying on my family to include participation in medical murders at the hospital where she worked. She had been providing Bradley's network with information about vulnerable elderly patients, with significant assets facilitating their abduction and replacement with fake death certificates. But the most shocking discovery was that Jake's murder wasn't Diana's first killing. Medical records and surveillance evidence revealed that she had been poisoning elderly care facility residents for years, accelerating their deaths to gain access to their assets. Jake's investigation had threatened to expose not just inheritance fraud, but a serial killing operation that had claimed dozens of victims. Edgar's rescue had prevented his planned murder, but other elderly victims in similar facilities hadn't been as fortunate. Federal agents discovered mass graves near several illegal care facilities containing the remains of inheritance fraud victims who'd been killed when their assets were completely drained or when they became too difficult to control. The scope of Diana's criminal enterprise was so extensive that federal prosecutors decided to pursue charges under organized crime statutes typically reserved for major drug cartels or terrorist organizations. The evidence suggested that Diana and Bradley's network had been responsible for hundreds of murders and thefts totaling over $100 million. Diana's capture marked the beginning of the largest inheritance fraud prosecution in United States history. Her decision to return to Denver and attempt witness elimination had provided federal agents with evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy that would allow them to dismantle the entire network and recover assets for surviving victims. However, the investigation also revealed that Edgar's imprisonment and abuse had caused permanent psychological damage that would require extensive treatment and support. His survival was miraculous, but the trauma of believing his family had abandoned him while being systematically poisoned and tortured would affect him for the rest of his life. Jake's murder had been even more cruel than initially discovered. Diana had prolonged his suffering by gradually reducing the effectiveness of his cancer treatments, allowing her to enjoy watching his decline while stealing the money that could have saved his life. She had taken sadistic pleasure in his pain, viewing his death as entertainment rather than tragedy. But Jake's investigation and evidence collection had ensured that Diana's crimes would be thoroughly documented and prosecuted. His love for me had motivated him to continue working even while dying, gathering the proof needed to protect me from Diana's criminal network and ensure that justice would be served. The federal trial would take months to complete, given the complexity of the evidence and the number of defendants involved in Diana's criminal enterprise. However, the evidence was so overwhelming that conviction was virtually certain for all participants, including Diana Bradley, my parents, and Sarah. And Diana's final gambit had failed completely. Her attempt to eliminate witnesses had instead provided additional evidence of her guilt while exposing the full extent of her criminal network. The woman who had chosen a fake engagement party over Jake's funeral was about to discover that federal prison offers no celebrations, only decades of confinement and regret. My grandfather Edgar had survived his imprisonment to testify against his captors. Jake's investigation had provided the foundation for dismantling a national criminal network, and my pursuit of justice had ensured that Diana's betrayal of family love and trust would result in consequences that would last for the rest of her life. The legal war was ending with complete victory for truth, justice, and the memory of everyone Diana had murdered or betrayed in pursuit of money she had never earned and didn't deserve. Diana's trial began 6 months after her arrest and lasted for 8 weeks as federal prosecutors presented evidence of the most extensive inheritance fraud operation in American legal history. The courtroom was packed daily with family members of victims, law enforcement officials, and media representatives covering what had become known as the family betrayal murder case. Diana showed no remorse throughout the proceedings, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence and even attempting to blame me for destroying our family with my investigation. Her lack of empathy or regret convinced the jury that she represented a permanent danger to society who could never be trusted with freedom again. The verdict was unanimous on all charges: first-degree murder for Jake's death, conspiracy to commit murder for Edgar's planned killing, kidnapping, and false imprisonment for Edgar's captivity theft of over $2 million from Edgar's estate money laundering fraud and conspiracy to operate a criminal enterprise. The judge sentenced Diana to life in prison without possibility of parole, plus an additional 99 years for her other crimes. Bradley received a similar sentence after pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty. My parents were sentenced to 30 years each for their participation in the fraud and Edgar's imprisonment. Sarah lost her nursing license permanently and received 15 years for her role in the conspiracy and her participation in other medical murders at the hospital. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge ordered the complete restitution of Edgar's stolen money, plus interest and penalties that brought the total recovery to over $3 million. Every asset Diana and her accomplices had purchased with stolen money was seized and sold, with proceeds returned to Edgar and the families of other victims. Edgar's recovery was slower than his physical healing, but his spirit remained strong throughout the legal proceedings. He moved into a guest room in my house after being released from the hospital, and we spent months rebuilding our relationship while learning to trust again after years of betrayal and deception. "Jake saved us both," Edgar said during one of our evening conversations on the front porch. "His investigation gave us the truth, but more importantly, it gave us each other back. Diana tried to steal our family, but love is stronger than greed." The money recovered from Diana's theft allowed us to establish the Jake Harrison Foundation for Cancer Research, focusing specifically on providing experimental treatments for patients whose insurance won't cover advanced care. Our first grant recipient was a young father whose situation mirrored Jake's struggle with inadequate treatment options. Edgar insisted that his will be updated to reflect his true wishes, leaving his entire estate to continue Jake's foundation work after his death. "Money should heal families, not destroy them," he explained to our lawyer. Diana forgot that wealth means nothing without people to love. I returned to work part-time at Patricia's law firm, specializing in cases involving elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Our first major case involved a family whose elderly grandmother had disappeared under circumstances similar to Edgar's kidnapping. Using lessons learned from Diana's prosecution, we were able to rescue the victim and prosecute the criminals within months rather than years. The illegal care facility network that had held Edgar was completely dismantled, with federal agents rescuing 43 elderly victims who'd been reported dead but were actually imprisoned. Several victims had been held for over 5 years, during which their families had grieved their supposed deaths while criminals drained their assets. My relationship with the extended family required careful rebuilding. Some relatives had genuinely been deceived by Diana's lies about Edgar's death and my supposed instability. Others had known about the fraud but remained silent out of fear or greed. I chose to maintain relationships only with family members who expressed genuine remorse and actively worked to make amends. The house Jake and I had shared became a gathering place for Edgar and the new family we built from friends who had proven their loyalty during the crisis. Patricia became like an aunt to me, visiting regularly and sharing stories about Jake's legal work that helped me understand the full extent of his love and protection. One year after Diana's sentencing, I received a letter from her in federal prison. She attempted to apologize and claimed she had been manipulated by Bradley into committing crimes she never intended. I threw the letter away without finishing it, recognizing another attempt at manipulation from someone who had never understood the meaning of genuine remorse or responsibility. Edgar lived for 3 more years after his rescue, spending his final months surrounded by love instead of the isolation and abuse Diana had planned for him. He died peacefully in his sleep, holding my hand, while I read him stories about Jake's foundation helping families access the cancer treatments he never received. The foundation grew into a national organization providing grants for experimental cancer treatments, with satellite offices in major cities across the United States. We helped over 200 families access life-saving treatments that their insurance companies had denied, giving them hope that Jake never had during his final battle. On the 5th anniversary of Jake's death, I visited his grave with flowers and a letter describing everything the foundation had accomplished in his memory. The cemetery was beautiful in spring, with trees blooming and families visiting loved ones in an atmosphere of peace, rather than the desperate grief I had felt during that first lonely funeral. "I kept my promise," I said aloud at his gravestone. "Diana faced justice. Edgar knew he was loved, and your investigation saved dozens of families from the fraud you discovered. Most importantly, I learned to fight for truth instead of accepting lies, and to choose love over convenience." The transformation from grieving widow to advocate for justice had taken years, but I had discovered strength I never knew existed within me. Jake's love had given me the tools to fight Diana's evil. Edgar's survival had given me hope for healing, and the foundation's success had given me purpose for the future. Diana had chosen money over family, betrayal over loyalty, and murder over mercy. Her reward was life in prison without the possibility of parole, decades of confinement, without love, friendship, or the wealth she had killed to obtain. She had gained nothing and lost everything, including her freedom, her reputation, and any chance of redemption. My reward for pursuing justice was the knowledge that Jake's death had meaning Edgar's suffering had ended, and dozens of families had been saved from similar tragedies. The money Diana had stolen was returned to its rightful purposes, helping people instead of funding crime and corruption. The family that had abandoned me at Jake's funeral no longer existed, replaced by a chosen family built on trust, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. I learned that blood relationships mean nothing without love, while chosen relationships built on mutual respect and support can heal even the deepest betrayals. Justice had been served completely. Diana would spend the rest of her life in prison. Her criminal network had been dismantled, and her victims had received compensation for their suffering. More importantly, love had triumphed over evil. Truth had overcome deception, and family had been redefined as people who choose each other rather than people who share genetics. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right when someone you love is committing serious crimes? Your experiences and thoughts could help others facing similar impossible decisions. Please share your story in the comments like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding justice, and share this with someone who might need to hear that love is stronger than deception. Thank you for listening to my story and witnessing my journey from grief to healing. May you always choose truth over convenience and surround yourself with people who earn your trust through their actions, not their words.